Now, joining us to discuss what these trade tariffs, trade wars mean for the world, and more so what they mean for India, is a very special guest this morning, the founder of GTRI, Mr. Ajay Srivastava. Mr. Srivastava, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's first begin with the most obvious sectors that we know are likely to get impacted in this tariff war that Donald Trump is waging on. First one being the pharma sector. India's pharmaceutical sector has exports of over $10 billion. Then you've got precious stones exported to the US contributing to about $7.6 billion, machinery and equipment standing at about $6.1 billion. So, Mr. Srivastava, let me first begin by asking you the impact on India's pharma sector. How big a dent is that likely to be?
Good morning, Kartik, and good morning, viewers. Before starting, I want to say this is not about high tariffs alone.
Okay.
Otherwise, US is having an FTA with Mexico and Canada since 1994. It was earlier called NAFTA and then called USMCA in 2019.
That's right.
They were having zero tariff trade for the past more than 30 years now. But still, Mr. Trump has gone ahead and imposed tariffs on them. So it's not about tariffs. They were having zero tariff trade. So Canada and Mexico, they were not imposing higher tariffs. It was zero tariff trade. So it's just he's using threat of tariff to extract more concessions. Else, we can also see why he's threatening European Union. They have comparable tariff to the US. So tariffs are not an issue. He is using high tariff as an alibi to extract concessions from his trade partners. So now, with that, I answer. So the correct answer would be that we don't know. In fact, Mr. Trump's team also is not clear how they are going to impose the tariffs. Are they going to impose one tariff on the country? For example, they say 20% on China, 25% on Mexico. That means no sectoral changes will be there. Every sector, every product will be hit by one singular tariff, 20%, 10%, something like that.
But Mr. Srivastava, if I can just cut you short there, that seems to be the case with Mexico and Canada. That doesn't really seem to be the case with India, because here you're not talking about one blanket tariff. What Donald Trump is saying is that it is going to be reciprocal tariff. So whatever India charges the US, I believe from a sectoral perspective, is what the US will want to try and slap onto India.
Sure. So Siddharth, Kartik, before answering to your question, I would like to say this, that if reciprocal tariffs, they are worked out at the product level, they are not going to work. For example, US exports apples to India and we charge 50% tariffs on US apples. And Mr. Trump says, okay, you are charging 50%, I'll also charge 50% apples from India. We say, go ahead, please, we don't export apples to you. That applies to most of the export items. But having said this, we have analyzed the sectoral impact at the product level, sector level, and in the pharma sector now, to answer your precise questions, if he is applying tariffs at the sectoral levels, for example, he applies one single tariff on the pharma sector. Pharma, we export about $12 billion worth of generics mostly to US,
right.
And half the generics into the US are coming from India, and 90% of the prescriptions prepared in the US hospitals, they use generics. So the number is less. So US total pharma imports is $212 billion
right.
in the last year. So our export is only $12 billion. But in terms of impact, it's much larger impact. So if they hurt us with tariffs, we charge about 7.5% on pharma.
Okay.
If they charge the reciprocal tariff, say 7.5% on us, and our tariffs decrease, where from they are going to buy the generics? They don't
right.
have options. Even China supplies half the generics we supply to them.
Right.
They buy mostly patented drugs. So if they apply tariffs on pharma, our pharma may be expensive, but the exports will not decline for the reason that pharma sector says that their tie-up with the US importers is that they will allow Indian firms to charge a particular price.
Right.
All the import charges will be borne by the US side. So whatever tariffs are increased, I think there will be no impact on the pharma sector.
All right, no impact on the pharma sector. Let's move to two new and rather surprising sectors which are now voicing concerns. The first being, of course, the 100% tariff on agriculture exports. So, US was India's largest importer of agri products at $5.7 billion in FY 21-22. So, agriculture sector is a new sector which has been mentioned by Trump, and there's likely to be a 100% tariff on India's agri exports. But that may still, like you gave the Apple example, Mr. Srivastava, that may still not really be as much of a dent. But the sectors which are voicing concerns now seem to be the smartphones and wearables and the electronics industry, where India now charges a 16.5% duty on electronic components. Now, India is expected to export about $8 billion worth of iPhones to the US this year. And we are also seeing what we are referring to as Apple's Ghar Wapsi with a US investment of $500 million. So, for India's electronics market, which is one of the only sort of success stories we've seen in recent times when it comes to manufacturing and making in India, is that likely to get impacted, to your opinion, sir?
Kartik, let's understand this in a cool fashion, because certain point of views are being emanated by vested interest. Here we have to understand. So iPhone, US doesn't make iPhone. Apple owns the IPR and they get half the money. So $1,000 worth of an Apple iPhone piece, it gets more than $450. That's fine. Okay, but it doesn't assemble. Assembling is done in China and now in India in a bigger way. Okay, so suppose they are imposing tariffs of 20% on China. More and more assembly operations are likely to be shifting to India. So India should gain. Now you talk about, and US will have nothing to do because exports from India. So suppose $1,000 piece of iPhone exported to US, $450 Apple gets. What India gets? India gets less than $30 of this. So US should have no worries on the iPhone account. Now you talk about the components. US doesn't make component. They should not worry about the component.
All right.
Component, we have about more than 20 electronic associations which deal with all these issues.
Right.
One or two associations, they don't miss any opportunity to force the government, to push the government to cut tariffs on the components. Be it any budget, they will say cut duties on the component. Government does also, but that harms our fast developing component ecosystem. For example, we in the past 5 years since the implementation of the PLI scheme, as you rightly mentioned, the export data, it's more than $16 billion. And we have hundreds of firms who are making parts of the mobile phone components. If we keep on cutting component tariffs every year, then that component system, which is in nascent stage, weak stage, it will get destroyed. So our aim should be to strengthen that ecosystem. And one more reason for doing this is, it's the most successful policy, as you rightly said. It's the most successful PLI scheme. Our production of a smartphone has gone from nearly 5 years back to $50 billion domestic production. So that means policies at whatever level, whatever tariffs, they are working very fine. And here there is absolutely no angle there is no US angle. US cannot assemble a smartphone. Their labor charges are very high. Right. And if China's tariffs are higher than India's tariffs, we will discover on 2nd April, more and more assembly of iPhone is likely to be shifting to India. We should just quietly enjoy for this sector without disturbing the policy parameters.
All right. Good, important news and a good headline that you're giving us, Mr. Srivastava, this morning, that there is going to be absolutely no negative impact. In fact, if anything, a positive impact with more assembly of electronics shifting to India, and tariff threats are not likely to impact India's now fairly well settled and still growing electronics manufacturing sector. I want to shift focus quickly to cars and especially electric vehicles. Now, from what we are hearing is that US is pushing for zero tariff on car imports in India and wants to deal with India in the EV space, in the automobile space. Right now, India's tariffs on fully built units are over 100%. Even the, it's not just the components, but even when you look at the semi-built up or the entire auto sector per se, there seems to be some sort of difference between what the world expects India to charge and what India is charging. In the wake of this tariff threat and the imposition of reciprocal tariffs, I understand India doesn't export too many automobiles to the US, but do you think India is likely to change its EV policy or its automobile tariff policy to attract more US investments or brands coming into India?
So our domestic automobile industry is very competitive, and I want to say that India is charging higher duties, but all other countries, including the US, European Union, everybody has very high non-tariff barriers. So it's
Right.
very difficult to export cars, even if you are making globally competitive cars. It's very difficult. Our tariffs are visible. Having said that, if we cut the tariffs to, say, we lower the tariffs on cars, I don't think it's going to hurt our car sector, because cars from US or the world over, we look at our high tariffs, 100%, 125%. What is happening at the field level? We must know this. We are seeing a lot of BMWs and Mercedes in Indian roads. They don't come to India paying 100% tariffs. They are imported into India at the CKD, completely knocked down condition. The parts and component, they come here, they are being assembled here and then exported here. So still parts and components are being imported at 15% tariffs. So 100%, of course, they can import, they can sell us the completely built car, but they have the options, and all the good companies are using that option, 15%. So even if we say cut tariff from 100 to 15%, I don't think much difference will be there
Right.
on exports from the US. Of course, if we do this from imports from Japan or South Korea, they may shut their operations in India and go back and start exporting those things from there. But from
Right.
US, I don't see much problems.
All right, not much problems from the US. And again, an interesting observation there, Mr. Srivastava, that by changing the auto policy, we may actually end up losing investments from Japanese automakers, even if we want to favor American automakers. Well, let's leave it at that this morning, Mr. Srivastava. Thank you so much for taking time out and putting into context this tariff war, trade war, and the fears that are being cited in India and by the industry. Thank you very much for joining us.